stronger!
Gentlemen and ladies, it's showtime!
If there's anything I'll give the 2010s credit for, it's giving indie game development the boost it ever so needed. But don't get me wrong, it's not like indie games started in the 2010s. We've had a ton of titles that came before that era, but the 2010s let indie games finally announce their presence. This community of passionate developers, inspired by the games of their youth and their dedication to video games as a whole, has given us memorable characters, record-breaking titles, and subverted expectations. Who would have thought that one of the Xbox One's best-selling titles wouldn't be a realistic shooter or a sports game, but instead a 2D run-and-gun shooter inspired by 1930s era animation. With the rise of indies came changes we never expected. In my opinion, the horror genre wouldn't be where it is without the indie community. Think about it. During the late 2000s, all we were really getting for horror games were zombie games and Silent Hill knockoffs. But after this community showed what it could do, I noticed that even corporate studios started trying new ideas and concepts. Indie devs have given us new nightmares in creative and innovative ways, from making unconventional monsters, such as cartoony animatronics, rubber hose characters, and anime schoolgirls, reminding us of the worst part of our childhood, from creepy neighbors to abusive teachers awakening a primal fear within all of us, and reminding us that not all fears are physical, from the fear of getting lost, to one's own mind, to the unknown itself, and what our own world could be hiding from us. Today, we'll be talking about 10 of what I believe to be the most important indie horror games that came during the 2010s era of indies. If there are any games that you believe are just as important, if not more, like Tattletale, Faith, Little Nightmares, or Night of the Consumers, then leave them down below. I could always make a sequel. Now, let's awaken ourselves to explore the terrifying route that's ahead of us. It may seem endless, but trust me, there are ways to get past limbo. When we were kids, the world seemed so much bigger and scarier. While we had the comfort of our homes and families, there were times when we found ourselves facing mature and difficult situations that not even grown-ups could save us from. One for many was getting lost. Some kids love to explore, but others are terrified of unfamiliar territory. Even the smallest of forests may seem infinite to our young, impressionable eyes. Playdead's Limbo, released on June 21st, 2010, allows us to relive that fear. You play as a young boy who wakes up in the forest and goes out to find his sister. But this forest isn't like the ones we had to get lost in. This forest is filled with giant spiders, hostile natives, and mind-controlling larvae. It's everything we were afraid the forest would be when we were young. The first thing you'll notice is the game's art style. It is completely black and white, with the foreground elements, including the player, being a solid shade of black, with backgrounds filled with white mist and gray fog, which gives you an obvious indication as to what can and can't be interacted with, and gives you a sense of scale of your surroundings, even with such a limited art style and color scheme. This boy has to go through a lot, and you're gonna have to feel every failure you make. This boy will act accordingly to what has killed him, from being stabbed in the head, drowning, being crushed, electrocuted, and other gruesome final moments that you have to watch over and over until you get it right. But besides that, the game isn't actually that long. If you know what you're doing, you can actually beat the game within an hour or two. But this horror is crammed with creative ideas, challenging puzzles, and new threats at every corner. I would much rather play a shorter game that shows me all of its unique concepts, instead of forcing me to perform trivial tasks before entering the occasional fun moment. Sometimes, a longer game isn't always a better game. Limbo may be a shorter experience, but for what it offers, you'll remember playing every second of it. But if the length truly is that important to you, then maybe you could try Playdead's other game called Inside. It plays the same way as Limbo, but is much longer in length and bigger in scale. But if you'd rather forget seeing this boy die so horribly over and over, then be my guest. But I warn you, you might forget more than you intended. Amnesia is more common than you think. I've already talked about this game before in the pilot of Emo Reviews, so I'll try to keep what I have to say brief. Amnesia: The Dark Descent is a first-person horror game developed by Frictional Games and released on September 8th, 2010. You play as Daniel, who wakes up in the Brenningburg Castle with no memory as to how he got there. He soon discovers that his memory loss was caused by himself deliberately, as he finds a note written by his pre-amnesia self telling him to head deeper into the castle to kill its baron, while avoiding what's known as the Shadow. The horror of the game is less about jump scares and being chased by monsters, and more its atmosphere, sound design, and insane effects. The longer you are in the dark, the more you'll be affected by your own madness. Most of these effects are visual and auditory hallucinations.
Someone's coming!
To avoid decreasing your sanity, you must stay in the light by lighting candles and keeping your lantern filled with oil at all times. Much like ammo in the Resident Evil series, you're only given so much to use, so you must be careful with your limited resources. After the game was released, several used the Steam Workshop to mod the game to create their own levels and even their own stories. You weren't just paying for one game, you are basically paying for an entire experience. Soon after Dark Descent, there would be other games in the Amnesia series, such as A Machine for Pigs in 2013 and Rebirth in 2020. Unfortunately, neither of which would be received as well as the first game. But Frictional did create a new game that met its own success and praise, Soma, which was released in 2015. Simon Jarrett, who suffered brain damage after a tragic car accident, becomes a part of an experimental brain scan, but instead, the scan seems to send him into the future of 2104 in an underwater research facility called Pathos 2. Of course, all is not what it seems, as his mind is now inside that of a machine, and there is no sign of human life, but instead machines that were once human. Soma was met with instant praise, and shows that Frictional Games is more than just a one-trick pony. Perhaps maybe they could set up the foundation of something new, something where they can secure their success and contain new nightmares. Or maybe they should protect others from these nightmares. Oh wait, there already is something like that.
The door isn't responding to any of our attempts to close it, so please maintain direct eye contact with SCP-173 and...
One of the few horror trends that came from the early 2010s to still be relevant and respected as it was then is the SCP Foundation. The SCP Foundation is a fictional organization dedicated to investigating and suppressing otherworldly and paranormal entities, hence the name Secure, Contain, Protect. They not only protect possibly endangered entities from the outside world, but also contain deadly anomalies from us. On April 5th, 2012, I'm gonna pronounce this wrong, aren't I? Junis Rickanen. I'm so sorry. Look, I'll just put the name on screen. They brought us an interactive version of the Foundation called SCP Containment Breach. In SCP Containment Breach, you play as a Class D personnel who was brought in to test SCP-173. SCP-173 is a bipedal concrete statue that can only move when no one is looking at it. If you even as so much blink, then SCP-173 will have a brief opportunity to move at an incredible speed and try to stab your neck, so that you never open your eyes again. Of course, things go wrong, and not only has SCP-173 escaped, but many others have as well. You can either try to escape the facility, or go through the effort of recontaining each escaped SCP. Each SCP is different in their own way. Some are monsters, others are items you can use, and some are even locations. It's up to your best judgment on each item you find, and to keep an eye on your blink meter. Be extremely aware of your surroundings, or else you may face the wrath of one of these many escaped anomalies. Some of which include SCP-049, the Plague Doctor, who will follow the player claiming that it simply wants to cure them, but his cure will turn you into SCP-0492, or a zombie. SCP-096, the Shy Guy, is a violent SCP who will chase after and kill the player if they look at him in the face. Or SCP-106, a humanoid who can phase through walls, and if he catches the player, then they will end up in his pocket dimension, where they must try to escape. There are countless more SCPs added through the game's lifetime. Now, a new version of the game is being made. A high-quality remake of SCP Containment Breach, made on the Unity engine, is in production, and being brought to you by Airy Gaming Studios. And the SCP Foundation isn't the only one to have a popular release to get an HD successor. But at least most of those at the Foundation have a face. In 2009, the internet was introduced to one of its most memorable horror monsters, created by Victor Surge for a contest on the Something Awful forums, called the Slender Man. The Slender Man is a tall, faceless figure who appears to be wearing a suit. Despite this sophisticated figure, he's anything but. The Slender Man is known to stalk his victims, typically children, sending them deeper into madness until he eventually catches them. Only 3 years later, on June 26, 2012, Parsec Productions allowed us to live this nightmare in a free downloadable experience called Slender, the 8 Pages. In Slender, the 8 Pages, you play as an unnamed individual who wanders into an empty park at night to look for 8 pages that relate to the Slender Man. As for why, it was never explained. Perhaps this person saw these pages as proof of the Slender Man's existence, or thought they could help in a missing persons case. Another idea is that they were dared to do so by their friends, and the worst possibility is that the Slender Man lured them into his clutches. All you could do is walk, sprint, and look around your surroundings, grabbing pages and turning on and off your flashlight. You must navigate through the park and get all 8 pages before the Slender Man catches you. Each page is randomly placed on one of 10 different landmarks, and if that wasn't bad enough, with each page you collect, the Slender Man becomes more and more active, as the sound starts to become louder and more disorienting. It doesn't take long to beat Slender. If you know what you're doing and know all of the landmarks' locations, then you could beat the game within 5 minutes or so. But you might not be able to do so due to the game becoming gradually more difficult as time goes by. That, and the Slender Man can sometimes warp too close for comfort and kill you instantly. I'll be honest, after all these years, I still haven't fully beaten the game. The most I've ever gotten was 7 out of 8 pages, and then the bastard teleported right behind me! Slender, the 8 Pages is a short, simple, yet effective horror experience you can play completely for free to download. But if that's somehow too small, then you might like the next game. Congratulations! You've outlasted this video to its near halfway point.
Little pig.
A group of game developers that had left the AAA industry to form their own independent studio. That studio was Red Barrels, and on September 4th, 2013, they released a new horror game that would help not only the 2010s era of indie horror, but horror in general. Outlast. In Outlast, you play as a freelance journalist named Miles Upshur, who got an anonymous message that there could be human experiments going on at the Mount Massive Asylum. Miles arrives at the said asylum to get as much evidence as he can to expose the asylum, only to find that many of the patients or the variants have escaped, and are now running the halls, turning this mental institution into a hell of its own making. Miles now must try to escape Mount Massive Asylum, or die trying. The game plays like most first-person horror games, but with the added addition of a video camera with night vision that allows you to see in dark places. But the camera is not unlimited, as the batteries will slowly start to die out. Luckily, there are other batteries hidden on the shelves and other places for you to salvage. Because of this, the game immediately sticks out with its more bright green night vision color scheme that's mainly associated with it. Each variant is also different in their own way. The most common is Chris Walker, a giant, strong, lumbering figure with superhuman strength. He can easily grab and lift a fully grown man with one hand and tear them apart with the other. Richard Traeger, a sadistic murderer who still has a grip on reality unlike most of the other variants. He is known to experiment on other patients to learn and study the human body. And also, Father Martin. He is one of the few variants who assisted Miles on his nightmarish journey, but he is still a sadistic psychopath like the rest. The game also added DLC called Whistleblower, where you can play as Waylon Park, a software engineer who is revealed to be the individual who sends the anonymous tip to Miles. He is discovered, but finds a way to momentarily escape. Outlast was received extremely well upon release, and is still memorable to the horror community. The game had a sequel that was released 4 years later, though it wasn't as well received as the first title. A third installment is set to release in 2021, so be sure to look forward to that. Be patient though. It's not like this game is gonna come out in 5 nights.
We give him a running start. There's an idea. And when we kill him slow. Such patience. I want his tongue. And liver. They are yours.
Be back, no more sleep.
Another year later, we would all be introduced to a viral indie horror game that many believed would only be relevant for a short period of time, but is still extremely popular to this day and has multiple games, books, toys, and even an upcoming movie, whenever that's coming. But how about we take a look at where this nightmare started? On August 8th, 2014, developer Scott Cawthon gave us Five Nights at Freddy's. Five Nights at Freddy's needs no introduction. I've already had to introduce this game multiple times, but I'll gladly do it again. You play as a new hired security guard for the Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria. From 12 AM to 6 AM, you must watch over the establishment and make sure things are ready for the day. You'd think it's to make sure that no one breaks in, but the reason is more because of the animatronics that will move on their own and wander the building. If they see you, then they'll force your body into an animatronic suit filled with sharp implements fit to gouge out your eyes and slice up your body. You have 2 doors, one on your left and one on your right, that you can shut if they get nearby, but everything from the cameras, lights, and even the doors are electrically powered, and if you run out of power, then it's lights out for you. The 4 animatronics you'll have to worry about are Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy. Each have their own behavior and routes you must recognize. The game exploded with its unique setup, original monsters, and its deeper story hidden through the halls. It was the main source of content when it first released, and Scott Cawthon wanted to keep that train going, so a sequel was quickly put into production. I call Five Nights at Freddy's the Pokemon of the 2010s. That sounds like a weird comparison, but hear me out. Both exploded onto the public eye, especially with a younger audience. Most people during their beginnings brushed both of them off as trends that will surely die in a few months. Some even reacted in anger to their popularity or how long the trend was beginning to last, from angry video rants for Five Nights at Freddy's and Newgrounds' Kill Pokemon games back in the 2000s. But as time went on, so did the detractors, as these trends became franchises still going on to this day. The series expanded with multiple sequels and spin-offs: Five Nights at Freddy's 2, Five Nights at Freddy's 3, Five Nights at Freddy's 4. Five Nights at Freddy's 2 through 4 came shortly after. But early on, many criticized Scott Cawthon for rushing out these titles, releasing them too early or having them be too similar to each other. FNAF World, released in 2016, a colorful RPG rather than a horror game, was the straw that broke the camel's back. Scott realized himself that more time needed to be put into these games, and even offered refunds to everyone who purchased FNAF World. He even asked the people who enjoyed the game to refund it, as he was developing an updated version with more content completely for free on sites like GameJolt. When Sister Location was announced, many were skeptical, as others were making jokes that the game was going to release in a week, despite its planned release date being much later. That's just what happened in the games at that time. but Five Nights at Freddy's' sister location released on its planned release date, and not only that, it also felt fresh and like a new start for the series. Ever since sister location's high reception, the other games all experimented with the formula in several different ways. A simulation game with Pizzeria Simulator, an expanded custom night title called Ultimate Custom Night, a VR game called Help Wanted, an AR mobile title called Special Delivery, re-releases of the first game on consoles like the Switch, and a new title in the works called Security Breach. Scott Cawthon himself also wanted to help the fan community by starting the Fazbear Fanverse initiative to help fund and release fan games. Some of these include Five Nights at Candy's 4, Joy of Creation Ignited Collection, Pop Goes Evergreen, One Night at Flumpty's 3, and Five Nights at Freddy's Plus. To this day, the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise and community is still going strong. I think it's safe to say that out of all the games in this video, Five Nights at Freddy's has made the biggest impact of all. But wait, there's something smeared on this list. An ink stain? After Five Nights at Freddy's took over the indie horror scene, things went dark for nearly 3 years. Many had started to believe that indie horror games were dying, or never had the staying power as other indies like Shovel Knight or Freedom Planet. But on February 10th, 2017, the Meatly decided to prove everyone wrong with a game that almost got as big as Scott Cawthon's animatronics. And all it took was inspiration from 1920s animation. Going back to the basics, Bending the Ink Machine is a first-person survival horror game. It's 1966, and you play as Henry, a retired animator who returns to his old workplace of Joey Drew Studios. He finds that the studio has been completely abandoned, but that's nothing compared to the dead body of Boris, who shouldn't even be alive in the first place considering he's a cartoon character. After being chased by the ink demon Bendy, Henry finds himself deeper in the studio, a part he didn't even know existed, and now must find his way out before he's attacked by ink blood abominations patrolling the area. The game was released episodically, with up to 5 chapters released to tell its story, with each chapter offering more of an insight as to what is happening, and to explore more of this grand studio. You meet other characters, such as Alice Angel, Allison, and others who were once employees at the studio, now transformed into ink blot monstrosities. The game's design is very similar to an old cartoon, with thick outlines on sets and a black and tan color scheme that reflects the age that the game is based on, though many have said that they could have done more with the 1920s inspiration, and I kind of agree. Cartoons of the era are surreal, stretchy, and often exaggerated in almost every way, but most of the game only seems to take inspiration from 1920s cartoons through its design and colors, rather than giving characters and enemies aspects or qualities similar to the Rubber Hose era. There's a lot that could have been done, like stretchy limbs, morphed expressions, transforming body parts, and more. The game sold well, and has even spawned several spin-offs, and even an upcoming sequel called Dark Revival. Speaking of arrivals, we would get a new student arriving in the indie horror scene that fall, and they've already found a club to call their own. Ever heard of bait horror games? If not, then let me explain. Bait horror games are titles that on the surface look innocent enough. They're cute, adorable, colorful, and have such wonderful characters. Gee, I sure hope nothing bad happens here! But of course, it does. Doki Doki Literature Club by Team Zavalto, released on September 22nd, 2017, is one of the most popular bait horror games. So much so that it's not even a secret anymore. You play as an unnamed protagonist who joins your school's literature club. There you meet 4 girls, each with conflicting personalities and an interest in getting to know you. These girls are Sayori, your childhood friend, the shy Yuri, the tsundere Natsuki, and Monika. Just Monika. The game is a visual novel with an anime-esque style, so there really isn't that much to do outside of reading the story, making choices, and writing poems. Not everyone is going to be into this game for that reason. Only those who like these kind of games may enjoy it. It takes a while, but that game does flip the switch, as it completely resets into something borderline unrecognizable. Characters start acting strange, visuals begin to break as the game becomes more and more disturbing each time. On-screen deaths, characters disappearing, vomit, mentions of mental illness and abuse, and so much more. It's hard to look at the game the same way. It just keeps getting more and more insane. And best of all, it's completely for free. Yep, you heard right. This nightmare is free of charge. Not only this, but there's a new version of the game called Doki Doki Literature Club Plus. It's a remaster of the original game with new stories, an HD upgrade, 100 unlockable pieces of art, new music, and will release on all consoles, with some even getting a physical release. Welcome to the Physical Release Club, girls. Now it's time for you to say hello to your new neighbor. Probably one of the most disliked games on this list, but the one that had the most potential was Hello Neighbor, developed by Dynamic Pixels and published by TinyBuild, that was also released in 2017, specifically on December 8th, 2017. But the game first gained traction long before it was released, during alpha teases and multiple beta tests given to Let's Players. The game has you sneak into your suspiciously creepy neighbor's house and find out what exactly is up with him in that locked door. You would have to distract the neighbor using objects around the house, and even guide him down the wrong path. As the game continued development, it became much more fantastical. The game held a lot of potential, a unique art style, a single constant threat, and the feeling one would get if they broke into someone's house. Which, I hope to God none of you have any sort of experience in. Many were excited for the game, but those same people would be greatly disappointed by the final release. Poor performance, iffy gameplay, and an overblown story are just a few issues to name. This is one of those rare cases where the game was more popular during its development rather than its released version. It's obvious what they were doing by the end, basically doing everything they could to make this game popular with Let's Players, streamers, and YouTube influencers. During the release of their short animated series, the TinyBuild Twitter account was basically begging MatPat to make a game theory about the cartoon, trying to get free advertising without the work to earn it. However, despite the criticisms, the series is still going. Hello Neighbor Hide and Seek, Secret Neighbor, Hello Engineer, and even a full-on sequel. It's unknown what the fate of the series is, considering even those same hungry influencers became wise to TinyBuild's intentions. That, and they've already poured over $15 million into this possible franchise. Let's just hope those employed at TinyBuild don't have to find new jobs because of that. Maybe whoever made this decision should be taught more about my favorite subject, math. A good teacher could help with that. Note, I said a good teacher.
"15 seconds. Detention for you. When will you learn?"
Looks like it's sweeping time.
Our last game was released on March 30th, 2018. Developed by Missman12, we have Baldis Basics in Education and Learning, a parody of horror games based on 90s educational PC games, complete with flat 3D renders, a small 4x3 resolution, and an extremely simplistic gameplay style. You are a student in this school who returns after dismissal to retrieve all 7 of his friends' notebooks. Seems simple enough, but then there's Baldi, a teacher who loves asking students random trivia questions about his favorite subject, math.
Oh, hi. Welcome to my schoolhouse.
The first one is easy to get. I mean, really. If you can solve a simple 2 + 2 question, then you can surely figure out what minus is. Yes, the question will become jumbled and impossible to answer, and Baldi hates students who can't answer his trivia correctly. From giving you a shiny quarter to chasing you with the threat of beating you for your stupidity. But Baldi isn't the only threat you must deal with. There's It's a Bully, Principal of the Thing, Playtime, Gotta Sweep, and more.
I see you, friend.
None of these characters kill you, as Baldi is the only one who can truly end your game. All they really do is get in your way, take away items, trap you, and anything they can to get you off your track. The game is available for free, but shortly after the game had blown up, its creator, Mistman12, decided to crowdfund a full version of the game on Kickstarter. There he was funded with over $60,000, and in 2020, he released Baldis Basics Plus on itch.io, GameJolt, and Steam, with even more versions coming as well. Baldis Basics Plus adds so much content to the original game that I can't even go over everything here. Let's try, shall we? New maps, new modes, a ton of new characters, new objectives, new rooms, multiple levels, field trips, new items, an in-game shop, flooding, grappling hook mode, and so much more. Though many have also bashed the game for its success, criticizing the fact that this simple little indie horror game was able to get a toy line. To that I say, come on. I get a lot of the confusion and frustration, but still it comes off as, how dare you be successful of the thing you created, rather than being constructive. If you don't like the game, or don't think it's good, then that's okay. But I'd rather be happy for someone being able to do something like this. Unless they're a piece of shit, but that goes without saying.
I'm gonna take your cane. What? No items. No items. What? No items.
But that's it. We've wandered through Limbo's Forest of Dread, remembered Amnesia: The Dark Descent, contained the nightmares from the SCP, made it through Slender's abandoned forest, escaped the madness of Outlast, survived each night till 6 AM at Five Nights at Freddy's, revisited old memories in Bendy and the Ink Machine, adjusted the game's files for Doki Doki Literature Club, said goodbye to our disappointing neighbor, and passed the impossible question in Baldis Basics. Of course, this is not all of them, but these are the games that became the most popular within the indie horror scene and helped define it for years to come. What's that? You're disappointed that I didn't talk about other games from the era? Maybe Tattletale or Faith? Well, that's okay, because this might not be the last time I revisit this era. So feel free to leave suggestions if I choose to do more, or perhaps I could instead talk about those games in their own episodes. Thank you for watching. This has been Cackling Pumpkins, and be sure to avoid the jump scares on the way out. Just kidding. Your connection will be Scary Penguin!